Not many Hollywood murder mysteries ever took a more dramatic turn.
New evidence ranging from records of the family psychologist to a movie script about a rich kid who kills his parents.
The jurors deciding the fate of Erik Menendez have deadlocked. They are hung on the most serious charge of first-degree murder and lesser charges against him. The judge has called a mistrial.
Are the Menendez brothers getting out of prison? And more importantly, should they get out of prison? Do they deserve a second chance? Well, it comes down to what you believe. And I was in prison for 19 years, and I was surrounded by a lot of people who'd committed really heinous crimes. And I was also surrounded by a lot of people who'd been subject to really unspeakable, terrible abuse, and quite often one led to the other. The abuse and the experiences they had as a kid led them on the life path that brought them to prison. So we know for sure that the Menendez brothers killed their parents in 1989. That's not in question. The only question is why? Because initially they went out and they spent a bunch of money and they lived it up, which people say is proof that they did it for the money. They were greedy and they took their parents out so they could get access to all the money. But the problem is, when they were arrested and when they went to trial, they testified about years and years of horrendous abuse from the father, from justification enabling from the mother, and even some abuse from the mother. So some people say, well, I don't believe that. There wasn't enough evidence. That's up for debate. You can watch one of the long documentaries. There's a lot of pro and con and back and forth. But what happened was both juries were deadlocked. That meant that both juries could not convict nor acquit. Some people wanted to convict, some people wanted to acquit. And so because they couldn't come to a resolution, they had a mistrial, essentially, and they had to have another trial. So in the second trial, it was no longer separate. Erik and Lyle instead were tried together. There was only one jury, and they were not allowed to present evidence of the abuse they experienced. Now, this was back in the 90s when people didn't really believe that boys got abused. They believed that, yeah, this might happen to girls, but nobody would do that to a boy, or they're just making this up. So this very real defense, this very real understanding should have been presented and wasn't. The jury ended up convicting them. Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, it doesn't matter because it's irrelevant because they were adults. They were 18 and 21, and they could have just left. And I get that. If you've never been in a domestic violence or an abusive situation, you may believe that to be true. It's the same that a lot of people say about, like, oh, that woman, why didn't she just leave? Well, having been in prison with a lot of people who are subject to abuse, having talked to a lot of domestic violence survivors, what I continually hear is a story of feeling trapped. Either that they've been threatened, or they've been told they won't succeed, or they've come to believe that they can't exist outside of this space. So they don't leave because they're afraid to, because a person says they'll kill them, or they'll hurt someone else, or kill someone else. They basically feel captive, or they just feel like they're powerless. And in the case of Erik and Lyle, they may have been 18 and 21 physically, but with those years of abuse, they did not develop normally. They were not mature and they were not healthy. And we already know that the human brain doesn't fully develop until 25 anyways, and you add in massive years of abuse, and they were incredibly developmentally disabled. So what that means is they were not thinking like a good, rational, capable 21 or 18-year-old. And even if they were, again, 18-year-olds and 21-year-olds don't make the best decisions. They were convicted, and because of the conviction, they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So they were told that they would spend the rest of their lives and then die in prison. There was a lot of support for them at the time. There have been campaigns. I think they both gotten married. There have been people who basically said this was not fair. These people didn't get a fair shot. There are also people who say, yeah, they absolutely deserve it. They're terrible. They're psychopaths or sociopaths. But if you look at the footage of them testifying and talking about what happened to them, maybe they are the best actors I've ever seen. My heart felt wrenched out of my body. When you look at them talking about that, I fully believe that that is what they experienced. I fully believe that that is what happened to them. So believing that, the question is then, do they deserve a second chance? Can someone be redeemed from having committed that violent act? I tend to believe that everybody put in the right situation or the wrong situation and pushed into a corner is capable of anything. So I can totally understand how they ended up in that situation, just the same way as I can understand a woman killing her abuser of however many years. New evidence has come to light that supports their original testimony. First, a letter that was written by one of the brothers has surfaced from months before the murder, where they talk about the abuse, they talk about what they were experiencing, they talk about what their father was doing to them. And this corroborates what they said at trial, because again, the initial trial, it was brought in. The second trial, they said there isn't evidence to corroborate this. Now, additionally, a boy who is a member of a band that was managed by the Menendez, the senior Menendez, has talked about how that man assaulted him, how violated him. The same thing that his son said happened to them. This is evidence to support their claim from the original case. And in California, anytime new evidence comes forward, they have to reevaluate. They have to look at what's going on. In this case, even the prosecutor has said, you know what? I think there's enough evidence that we should reconsider. They should be eligible for parole. So they're not saying we need a new trial. We're not saying let them out. We're not saying redo anything. They're just saying with this new information, they should at least be eligible for parole. I'll tell you firsthand, we abolished parole in Virginia in 1995, but we still have a parole board. So people who were sentenced before 1995 are still going up for parole, and I think we have a grant rate of less than 1.5%. So just because you're eligible for parole doesn't mean you're going to get it. Parole is supposed to consider a lot of things. It's supposed to consider the original crime. How heinous was it? How much time does someone need to do for the sake of punishment or the sake of justice? But also, who is someone? What have they done with their time? What have they done with their lives? Who are they now, and what do they have to contribute to society? If you look at Erik and Lyle, the question is, what have they done? But they've started families. They've helped the people around them. They've developed a meaningful role as adults. They basically become people who are worthy of being a part of society, who have something to contribute. And in fact, having gone through what they've gone through, I think they're incredible, credible messengers for those people who are in the experience they're in or in the situation they were in. They're incredible messengers for those who are suffering from abuse and don't know a way out, may think the only way out is violence. And if they could reach one person or 2 people or 10 people, imagine the change they could have. Imagine the freedom they could create for that abused person, and imagine the violence that could be avoided. They have to go in front of the parole board. So nothing is guaranteed, but I believe their story. I believe it was credible, and I believe they were abused terribly by their father. I do believe they should be eligible for parole, considering the fact that they were young, that they were subject to abuse, and that wasn't even allowed in consideration at the trial. And I do believe that, at least from what I know, that they deserve a second chance. They should be out in society, living with their families, contributing, finding ways to give back to society. And it's not like they just took from society. Don't get me wrong, they took a monster, person who was hurting them, who's destroying people's lives, and they basically got rid of that person. Yeah, and that's not justified, but I understand this is not reaching out and harming some innocent person. This is not reaching out and harming somebody at random. This is lashing back at a person who had destroyed them, body and soul. So, I think they deserve the chance to show that they are different people today, that they would make different decisions, that they hopefully will never be in a situation anything like that, but that they can contribute to society. They can show up and use their experience and use the things they've been through to help other people. And I fully believe they will. And that's one of the reasons that I hope that the Menendez brothers are parole.